cyclists, they would likely put those on Port Street on the lower part of the screen there. And that could be the first sharrows on a state trunk line in Michigan. That will tell the cyclists that you're okay to ride here and also let motorists know that to expect cyclists on the road here. This is the Midtown Loop, which is the first phase is on Kirby and John R. The second will be on Canfield and Cass. And portions of that are already just about completed. I'll show that photo up in the right there. That's a drinking fountain for tall people, short people, and for dogs. So it's going to be a great place to walk your dog. And there's also really fancy bike racks that look like something growing out of the ground. And also 2nd Avenue, Anthony Wayne Drive over here, and 3rd Avenue are going to get bike lanes. 2nd Avenue north of here is going to be converted to two-way. That's, it's a crazy boulevard now that's one-way. It's going to be converted to two-way with bike lanes added. Anthony Wayne Drive out here, when it gets repaved, is going to get its bike lanes. And then working with the city, 3rd Avenue will be converted back to two-way and bike lanes will be added. They may also add bike lanes to 2nd Avenue and in the future, Cass. One other project we work with a group out of Montana called Adventure Cycling is the Underground Railroad Bicycle Route. It starts in Mobile, Alabama. It comes up to Ohio and then makes a turn to the right and goes up through Buffalo. And we want to add a spur that goes from Ohio up to Detroit via Adrian and Ann Arbor. And this is it's a long tour. They have organized tours where you can pay money and they can carry your stuff with you. Or if you just want to do portions of it at a time, you can do that as well. But we're really excited to be able to bring that through Detroit. We're not sure how we're going to get people across the river yet because of the ferry service. So that's why it continues on up through the points, up to Meridian City, where there's a ferry now that will take bicycles. But hopefully, we'll get both those river crossings, and then we'd have a big loop for bicyclists. Linden Greenway is up on the northwest side, and a lot of that is completed, a lot of pocket parks, but the portion on the road is not completed yet. So we're working through some issues with traffic engineering. Inner Circle Greenway, I don't know if this is that big loop there, the big light blue loop. That is going to be a large 28-mile greenway. It actually makes use of a lot of the other existing greenways like the DeQuinter Cut and the Riverwalk, but it also involves a 9-mile section of railroad that's been abandoned that we're trying to purchase from the railroad right now. Hamtramck they just approved to spend $50,000 of community block grant money, and they're hoping to match that with some additional funding to get bike lanes built throughout the city of Hamtramck, which is really exciting. Then I'm going to talk about some areas there's some intensive studying going on for non-motorized. The lower east side is a large area from Mack to the river and from the DeQuinter Cut out to the city border at Alter. And within that area, we've had some community meetings and gathered input from the community about what kind of connections you want. And with that, we came up with this map that shows a lot of potential connections and trails. Some of the highlights include the Beaufait Greenway, which is kind of like the DeQuinter Cut, but it's not below ground, and it's just a little bit to the east. It would go up from the Riverwalk up to Gratiot. We are trying to pitch an extension of the Riverwalk from the Belle Isle Bridge all the way out to Alter Road. And then fixing up Jefferson as well, making that more bike-friendly. But some of the interesting statistics are, they did some surveys of the people in the community and found that if you build it, they will come. They will use it. They may not be biking now, but if you build nice, safe, clean facilities, and there's not much blight along the way, that people will suddenly bike more rather than perhaps rely on a car. So imagine the health impacts of, if we could build this project out and got a whole huge part of Detroit biking and walking more, and it really could be a really positive impact. Another area too is the Martin, Michigan area, which is directly west of Corktown, and they're doing some work now, looking at a lot of different options for biking that would connect up to Michigan Avenue, and then on the lower end of the city there, 48217, that's the Downriver Delta Greenway area, and we're looking at connections of how we connect the downriver area up to the city of Detroit. And then the News Center did a non-motorized study as well, which looks at this area and Henry Ford and all that, and how do we connect all this up, and Woodbridge as well. So there's a lot of planning going on, and hopefully from all this planning will result a lot more projects.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. As you all have probably heard, the city's engaged in a project we're calling the Detroit Works Project, which is a planning process to come up with a longer-term vision for the city of Detroit. And so there are a number of sort of planning considerations that we're exploring, one of which is how will we move. And so this is important consideration relevant to not only how will people move across the city and across the broader region, but also how will goods and services move, which are sort of both of the aspects of transit and mobility that we need to think about in this planning. Certainly, Todd showed a quote from the mayor, so certainly noting that we have to be diverse in what we do with transportation, noting that there are a lot of interests, a lot of different types of needs. So how do we accommodate all of that is something that we're challenged to do in the city. Certainly, it's probably no surprise to all of you that more and more people are choosing to live in urban areas, and specifically the quality of place is becoming the #1 sort of determining factor. And so it used to be this notion of people go to a place because of their job or their family or whatever, but now people are moving somewhere because of the quality of place. And so also ranking high in that decision-making process is this notion of options or availability of transit. And so we've seen great examples of some of the actual things that have been implemented, the things that are on the planning, but I think certainly that there is a lot more to be desired here in the city of Detroit as it relates to specific options. Right now, when we think about major modes of transportation, I'm sure it's no surprise to any of you that when most people going to work in the city of Detroit, their mode of travel that they're using is a private automobile by themselves, somewhere to the tune of about 70% of people when they're traveling to work are choosing to drive by themselves in an automobile. And so certainly there are probably a number of reasons why people do that, but then our challenge is to again think about how do we create a diversity of modes, and so that people, I mean, there are always going to be people driving their car, that's fine, but how do we sort of get rid of this sort of hierarchy of modes that we continue to have in the city? And then also, as we know, in addition to that, jobs are sort of kind of sprawling out further and further, so now this issue of transportation is also an economic issue, an equity issue for people, and so we have to think about how we connect people with jobs that are getting further and further away from the core of the city, but then also for people who don't have to travel far for their jobs, how do we think about the ways in which they want to access everything that they need for their daily life, it's the grocery stores, the park, their cultural activities, etc. And so I think that sort of really describes our vision for transportation and transit, which is this notion of how do we get to having a diversity of modes that really accommodate a diversity of options for the city of Detroit. I also would think that it's probably no surprise to most of you that we're very auto-dominated, and as a result of that, there are some people who, somewhere to the tune of about 30% of households in Detroit that don't have access to a private vehicle. So how do we plan for the needs of, again, people that are here, and then people who want to come? And I think this whole notion of car ownership is further exacerbated by the reality that certainly we in Michigan and in Detroit specifically pay really excessive insurance costs, and then also fuel costs continuing on the rise, etc. And so again, how do we get to this diversity of options? At the last round of cluster meetings that we did for the Detroit Works Project, some of which maybe you have participated in, if you were there, we sort of used this clicker technology to sort of gauge people's responses and priorities. And so one of the questions that we asked was, what changes are necessary to improve transportation? And so the range of options was improvements for either mass transit, bicycles, pedestrians, or automobiles. And improvements for mass transit riders, including bus and rail improvements, ranked the highest in responses for 73%, followed by automobiles at 17%. And surprisingly, options for pedestrians and bicycles were 4% and 7% respectively. And I think that's not to say that that's reflective of the entire population. It's just a population that chose to attend these meetings. And so, but I think that reflects the diversity that we're dealing with. And so how, again, do we get rid of this hierarchy of modes, noting that, because right now it's sort of this, sometimes you feel this a pitting of modes against one another. And so people are like, oh, you want to drive your car, it's a bad thing. Okay, but everybody has this choice about how they want to use it, what mode of transit. So how do we make sure that, and then I think it really speaks to this complete streets notion of how can we make modes available for everybody, like how can everybody get to where they want to go with different types of modes of transportation. So I think it's interesting that also the city this year is part of the Daniel Rose Fellows Program at the Urban Land Institute, and it's given a group of us an opportunity to visit a number of other cities. And so one of the things that I always try